of being here is to evolve into something greater.
So, sleep well. Mañana is a brighter day. In the Crayola state of America, there still might be confinements ready for your alignments, but you have the option to let your life scribble outside of them.
That's a beer ad, believe it or not. I want to, in fact, and many of you, I don't know if any of you are familiar with this icon of American branding. This was a part of my childhood, and it's amazing to me to talk to one of the marketers who is tasked with transforming this brand. Grandpa Smith had in his workroom in the basement, had a refrigerator, and when you opened it up, you saw simply every row filled with this icon was there. It was, he was a career man, union man with GE, and this was the beer of choice. In fact, I think until I was 12, I didn't even know that there was another brand of beer. I thought that was beer. Pabst Blue Ribbon represented one of those iconic working class blue-collar brands. Frankly, if Grandpa were alive today, I don't know what he'd make of this piece. He was blue-collar in a lot of ways, but it really speaks to the kind of transformation we're going to be talking about in the next half hour with Jillian Davis, who's the Director of Marketing Technology at Pabst Brewing Company. Jillian, say hello. That's Jillian.
Hello.
And Trisha Stecker, who is the Director of Channel Strategy and Digital Media at their media agency, are our partners. Please welcome Trisha and Jillian.
Hi.
So this is, we want to talk about, first of all, let's start with the legacy of Pabst. It's one of those great traditional beers. In fact, when I go back and look at old Pabst advertising, the word tradition was in almost every ad. Leaning back towards the previous century of that legacy. Why don't you tell us a little bit about the legacy of the Pabst brand that you were working with, but also the beer category in general?
Sure. So in the past, really, Pabst has always made a beer that acts and tastes like beer. As many of you may be familiar with, the overall category for beer is declining significantly, and we see wine and spirits really, inclining, not the right word, but really growing month over month. So we're looking at this and thinking, what is the issue here? And it's really the beer business as a whole. So when we think about acting and tasting like beer, we're losing to those brands that are really innovating to reach and recruit that new consumer, which is something that's a big focus for us now, as you could see by this very different piece of creative that's different than anything you've ever seen with the tradition of Pabst Blue Ribbon as a whole. One of the key visions for us now is really creating this message where people feel comfortable to create this road of a personal harmony. And as you can see here, we saw a bunch of diverse people in this video, and that's something that we really are leveraging that messaging to reach these new consumers and hopefully help to grow the category as a whole, but more specifically Pabst Blue Ribbon. So the category, though, is declining more than any other alcohol category right now for 21 to 30-year-olds. So it's a significant shift that we're seeing, and it's something that's really almost a wake-up call for us, where we needed to take a step back and understand that there's a new America that's coming. And through Pabst Blue Ribbon's messaging, we really want to create this harmony of nonconformity in a sense, whereas in the past it was kind of just championing more of this gritty underdog, which is very niche, and it's not, the consumer that's growing, it's the consumer that's outgrowing us. So that's just a super important thing for us now as we look back to the history of Pabst.
And your demo is aging. Your core demo is aging.
Yes,
right.
They're aging significantly, and that's part of the reason why the beer category is dying, is because a lot of the older white male gentlemen are also dying. So it's something that's like,
by the way, Grandpa is gone, by the way.
Yeah.
I didn't
No
want to
offense.
mention.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah.
I would just also add, from when we were getting briefed from PBR as the agency, when we were looking at the beer industry and they're talking about sales declining, I live in Denver, so marijuana is legalized there as well as many other states, year after year, more and more states. So it's very interesting to see the correlation of the legalization of marijuana and the decrease of beer, because people are not only choosing other beverages to drink, such as wine or sparkling seltzers, but then also just choosing other recreational activities.
Really? That didn't come up in the prep call. Really? Oh, that's a whole separate session, that pot is undercutting the alcohol industry.
A whole new buzz.
Wow. So tell me about the ways in which you're you guys think of that. You spend time thinking of this stuff, right?
Yeah.
We're in marketing for a reason.
Okay. So let's talk about Pabst repositioning as a result. Who is this new audience that you're aiming at? Are there particular segments of this audience that you think are especially ripe for this? And then how you're going to reposition the brand?
Sure. So we'll talk a little bit more about the segments as we make our way through the presentation. But the new target audience for us is really the 21 to 24-year-old multicultural and also the women consumers. We have never, the beer industry as a whole has never focused on women. And that's a huge miss, but also a great opportunity that we're taking advantage of. So I think just knowing that 52% of the US population identify as female is very obvious, and you would think that, you know, just bad business would not be marketing to those females. So we're really taking that as an opportunity to try to reach the consumers that are females, and we have some slides to show you guys here.
Yeah, so overall you can see that our effort towards shifting the messaging and really targeting females, just within 1 quarter from Q1, we're at, this is our social channels and what the overall compensation looks like. So there's 12% females just in Q1, and how quickly that shifts into Q2. And I don't want to say that we have Budweiser budgets, because we don't, and just what the messaging, how impactful it really was to get this new female advocate to just even, you see the message, but then to really like follow and want to continue the journey with PBR, to be able to actually follow. And I feel like just building communities is usually not a brand's focus. The brand focus is really just messaging and driving sales. So you know, Facebook doesn't even do like ads anymore to follow your page. So the fact that this many people, when we're not pushing out message saying follow our page, we see that big of an increase in that short period of time. And from the agency standpoint, we typically don't see this huge of a shift of growth. And this is just from the gender. So then also looking at age, as Jillian mentioned, when we're trying to shift younger from the 21 to 24-year-olds, we had initially done benchmarking when we were onboarded, and this is where we are today. Previously, it was this histogram was much bigger within the 35 to 44-year-old age, and then again, just in 1 quarter, how quickly that jumped up. So it's really incredible to see the gender as well as the age when you go out on a limb and really change your messaging. And with that, we're really trying to drive conversation. So you saw that video was completely different than anything you've seen, not just from a beer brand, but from a lot of brands, to go out on the limb, bring in immigration, bring in political issues. So as you can imagine, it drove conversation. It got buzz. As you can see, Forbes, CNN, I mean, even MediaPost picked us up. Huge. So you can see just within the industry how big of a shift this was to get noticed. I'm sure everyone can recall when Johnny Walker started shifting towards female, the press that Jane Walker got. So similarly, when Pabst goes out and changes the beer industry and changes how you're messaging, how quickly it gets picked up in the industry, but then as well as looking at this overall conversation. When we're trying to drive conversation, it did the job. Here you can see a lot of the positive news. I'll let you just take a minute to read a couple of these tweets and comments. So I have to say here, you can really see that we're reaching out to the advocates, and they're wanting to share the love. They're wanting to follow this brand even more. But then we were also looking at the holistic landscape. So we use our social listening tools to look across all the social channels and see what's really those big buzzwords that are coming through in these comments. And you can see that when we're saying we're trying to drive conversation in this new direction, American dreaming and people, and I mean, there's other expletive words, but then there's also immigration. You might not be able to see it. There's immigration, there's migrant. The fact that these are the type of words that are coming through a beer channel was really, really shocking for us. So it's showing that, yes, we'll see at the next slide, there might be negative, but overall, the good, the bad, we want to cultivate that. And you can see hipsters is actually pretty small, where I'd say, like, probably coming into this room, you'd identify PBR as more of a hipster beer. So to see that shrinking, and the fact that the word beer isn't even a big word is really shocking.
Let's clarify a little bit the production of that piece and what that was a piece of. This was a partnership with Vice, right? Tell me a little bit about the generation of the creative, but then also what the media plan was off of that, has been off of that creative.
Yeah, so we worked with Vice just knowing that they have the right audience, and also their creative capabilities were really great, and they worked with one of our brand managers on this who did an excellent job in driving this creative. And it's actually an entire documentary, so you can see the full thing on our YouTube channel, but our brand manager literally went on tour with these people, and he really immersed himself into culture that the beer industry would never really naturally do. So from a creation standpoint, I think that that was really an interesting take on this. And of course, we all had hesitation going into this campaign just because it is so drastically different. And like Trish mentioned, we've seen some really, really hateful and very shocking comments. And it just makes you realize, like, wow, there are people out here that, one, we're really making these people mad. And number two, like, we don't necessarily want to keep those consumers. If that's how they look at the world, it's kind of just a wake-up call again and what that looks like. But from a media standpoint, I'll let Trish talk a bit more about that. They work directly with Vice.
Yeah, so leveraging Vice, it was a great partnership to be able to utilize their platforms. We believe that sometimes it's best for other people to promote your brand for you, have that voice. It's more authentic to their platform. For those of you who did see the video, it definitely looks more like a Vice video than your typical TV spot. And then with that, leveraging all the social platforms, both Vice's as well as Pabst, so we worked together. We wanted to make sure it was coming from Vice, whether it was Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, but then how do we complement it within our own channels to make sure that the current customers are kind of realizing the shift that the brand is making. We don't want to walk away from the loyalists and the current customers that we have, but to make sure that it's seated within the owned and operated platforms.
So paid too? In addition to Vice, were you doing paid social and paid distribution as well?
Yeah, so the paid distribution was across both Vice as well as Pabst channels. So that way we'd be able to do some dark posts as well as having Vice target a specific target audience.
I want to back up a bit back to the big brand decision that you made. I mean, that ad is touching on almost every hot button. And in fact, if you go on to the series, I think the next phase of the series that I looked at starts with an undocumented immigrant. You're hitting just about every hot button in American cultural, the cultural controversies right now. Tell me a little bit more about Pabst's decision about this in terms of, A, as a corporation, how is it making this decision and then communicating it throughout? It's, you know, because you've got branch managers and regional managers that you're working with, how you communicated that through and have sort of a unified response to the negatives, and then how you did other things like how you finesse this problem. How do you keep your old customers while you're doing something that's so radically different?
Well, yeah, not going to lie, we've definitely lost some of our existing consumers, and a lot of those older consumers really looked at this as like a slap in the face almost. But I think you have to think about it from two different perspectives, from a cultural context and then a category context. So when it comes to communicating to our sales teams and the rest of the organization, we really have to be specific, and this is a cultural issue that we're facing here. And if we don't tap into that, how can we expect our brand to even resonate with America as a whole and this new America? So when we think about culture and understanding what's happening in culture and then category, it's something that, you know, they are two very different answers. And to be honest with you, there's not a singular or one right answer for what we're trying to do. It's a complex business, it's a complex landscape, so this is just kind of a step in the right direction in making a big shift. And we wanted it to be a dramatic change. So we're doing a lot of repositioning with a lot of our brands right now. So this is just one step for one of our brands
and
in
right,
the right
we should
direction.
make clear you have a lot of brands in a lot of different regions of the country. They're popular in a lot of different regions of the country. But you were also doing things like analyzing the data and doing targeting to pull throttle back in some areas, push forward in some areas. Tell us a little bit how you actually use the media to navigate some of the controversy.
Yeah, so a lot of the growth that you guys just saw in the female audience came from specific targeting. And like Trish mentioned, we were doing dark posts and also organic in-feed posts. We want our existing consumer to see this major shift that we're changing, but at the same time, we don't want to invest our media dollars to speak to people and to amplify that message to people that it's really just kind of aggravating. So I think it was really specific in how we worked with Vice too. I mean, we saw on our channels, it just wasn't performing as well as Vice. So we shifted those media dollars to make sure that, one, we're not just wasting, you know, these kind of amplification efforts on our channels, but making sure that, like Trish mentioned too, is driving that message through Vice and through the consumers as opposed to it coming from Pabst. And as you notice in the video, it's not a heavily branded video, and we didn't intend for it to be that. So that was a big decision that our brand team made together with the agency.
What metric were you looking at to gauge impact? Where you were having impact, was it ultimate sales, or were there other metrics?
No, so we're not looking at it from a sales standpoint, and a lot of people will think that that's kind of crazy, but because we don't sell direct to the consumer, it's hard to even drive an impact that is going to drive someone to the shelf through a video or a campaign like that. So this was mainly just recruiting that new consumer, and this was our first effort and first big campaign with R&R. So it's definitely been interesting, but we don't think that there was a huge spike in beer sales because of this campaign. If anything, it may have turned off a few people, and we're okay with that as a brand right now.
And I would say from the KPI metric, like the actual true performance to your question, we were looking at video views as well as the conversation driven. So looking at how much conversation was driven through comments, as well as if you go to the YouTube page, you'll see there's multiple iterations of this. And one is calling in your American dream, which was awesome. I mean, if we're talking about driving conversation, we actually gave this 1-800 number for people to call, leave a message of what your idea of your American dream is. And then that was fed through more videos, and it was actual recordings of everyone's American dream. So it's also like showing that it's not just Pabst's voice saying this, it's people who called in, which is I personally think is awesome. So video views, conversation, obviously we saw a ton from the PR piece of things, and then as well as taking this and applying it to all other creative. So yes, this was just one piece that Vice did, but then how the next image here, I mean, Jillian said that 52% identify as female, so here's a male identifying as a female within the Pabst channel, and you can see within one screenshot of comments, and I mean, this was just an organic post, and you can see how much conversation was just driven, and it's showing that, you know, if Pabst is going to do something as risky as this new Vice video, then you kind of need to stand behind it and keep that movement going.
Now, all of this that we've seen is really part of an even deeper, more fundamental shift that Pabst and its brands were doing internally and in relationship to its agencies. Maybe we should talk about, just briefly outline sort of the basic traditional Pabst approach to beer marketing that now we see shifting much more heavily into digital.
Sure.
How did you sell beer before?
So, I mean, we have a great team of field marketing representatives and a lot of sales representatives that are across the country. But as far as our marketing efforts that go into that actual selling process, it was really a grassroots approach. And each location, because we do really focus on localization, it's very important to us, even with our non-local legend brands, that piece was literally just grassroots marketing. And when it comes to digital, we were speaking almost in this vacuum and just hoping for organic growth. And we saw that for a long time because we do have this sort of iconic brand that people naturally sort of resonate with. But I think, again, thinking about the beer category itself and not making a shift is just not good at this point. So it was a major shift that we were really, really doing. But at the same time, I don't think that we lost any more sales because of the shift than we would have just naturally with the overall decline of the category.
So in order to do this shift, you knew you had to go digital in a way you never had before, that all those old techniques were not going to work if you needed to get this audience and you needed to work with this degree of precision. So tell us about the basic problem we engaged in the last panel of a brand that's working at retail, going through all of these different layers that doesn't have, I mean, in addition to the fact that most brands like you do not have first-party data, much first-party data, all of your marketing techniques were leaving you without any access to first-party data. So tell us about this process of building that DMP and how you were able to start assembling it.
Sure. So, I mean, to take a step back and really think about the reasons why we're building a DMP, it comes down to a lot of the localization aspect of all of our brands. We're not just a singular brand. It's a very complex portfolio, if you will. And like I mentioned before, there's not one answer that's going to solve all of our problems. A DMP is really just the first step in the right direction so that we can hone in on those local markets and really get specific on our messaging across all of our brands, but in this case specifically for Pabst. And as Trish can echo here, we're in the very early stages of building our DMP. So we definitely know that it's a challenge, being that we don't have a lot of first-party data. We're not legally allowed to sell direct to the consumer. So there are lots of smaller tactics in order for us just to have access to that data. That comes down to a lot of the partners that we work with. I think we have Ibotta in the room. That's one of our longtime partners. So we have a call with them next week about data. So if you're here, I'm not sure if we're meeting with you. Hi. So it's really about having the right partners from both an agency standpoint and also a vendor standpoint, because that's our access to that data. We use them to reach the consumer because we can't do that on our own. From more of a local market standpoint, tying back to our field marketing reps, they do a ton of events that really they're driving this message beyond just a national level and in these very specific markets that are very different than each other. So we use simple things like photo booths where people are signing up for email. We're capturing data that way. We're partnering with Live Nation so that we can capture data that way as well through ticket purchases and also on-site events. So there are lots of smaller ways that we can actually get that data. It's just a matter of finding the right partners, working with a great agency like R&R, and really, executing. So it's complex, but
Let's talk about the execution and leveraging that data and the kind of segmentation that you're doing on the agency level.
Yeah, so I feel like not many people get to come in with such a clean slate of, you've got this empty DMP ready to be built. We don't have any of the historical frameworks that we have to work against. We get to come in. R&R is also building websites for them. So how do we even strategize building the website? How can we not just ask for an email, but what other elements should we be asking for that will feed the segment? So from the agency standpoint, everything that we're thinking of, whether it's building a website, thinking about their owned and operated channels, as well as down to the paid, it's really thinking data first, and what can we be doing to capture data, and then what can we do with that to then feed out to the right audience. So we've got our first party data and starting to build that to be able to feed in, and thinking about all the data that we historically have is all from those loyalists, which are not the necessarily new target audience, but we had to think about how to not ostracize them. And when you have a DMP, you're able to port that out into email or out into owned and operated, so that way you're still speaking to them because you need to as a brand. They're the ones who are currently driving your sales. It's your prospecting audience that will drive your future sales. And then taking any of those second party insights, applying that across multiple segments. So we have loyalists as well as advocates. I'd say in that last screenshot you saw that based on those passionate conversations, they're more of the advocates, and it's the people who are attending all these Pabst events. So how do we let them be more vocal, and how do we give them even more content to drive conversation around and to make sure that we're listening to them? So we're building out segments based on loyalists, based on advocates, as well as based on this new consumer. And from the new consumer standpoint is where we're really having to lean on the paid aspect because we don't have the historical data. And that's where we need to look to partners like Live Nation that let us pixel our media to be able to capture the data on the impression level, not just working with the walled gardens such as Facebook and Google, because they don't let us pixel and unless they had clicked through from Facebook, which when we're talking about awareness and video views, we're not necessarily asking them to click through to the website. So how do we really balance that conversation we want to drive, as well as feed the back end, feed the DMP for future one-to-one messaging? So we walk that fine line of knowing what our KPI is, and at the end of the day, if our objective is really awareness, then we are going to do what's best for awareness, and then think in the back end, if we're driving awareness and all this brand equity, then eventually they will come to the website. And that's where hopefully then that they'll be more willing to give us their email address, or when we put an ad in front of them to go to a Sound Society concert, when they go there, they'll give us more data then because they see that we're a trusted brand.
What have been the key roadblocks so far in all of this? Where have you had where has been the biggest challenge both on the brand side and the agency side?
So from the agency side, as I mentioned, the walled gardens, I would say that's one of our from paid media standpoint, our biggest challenge is walled gardens. When we're investing so much money there, it's frustrating that we pay so much for a DMP, but yet we're not able to leverage all the data or then pipe those audiences back through. So as much as we could build this new audience in a DMP, we can't go and put it into Facebook. And then from the standpoint of our other partners, so our DSP is the trade desk, we can of course link it back into the trade desk, but then you see a match rate of maybe 50 to 60%. Even we were excited when we saw 75% of our last audience, but the fact that you can be excited about 75% of your audience, or you can be saddened that you just lost 25% of your data, and you're paying so much for that data to be in the DMP, and you just lost it just simply by trying to transition it.
I would say from the brand side, back to just finding the right partners. I think that that's essential as you're exploring even who your DMP is going to be with. We're just entering a relationship with someone right now, and we're facing some challenges, but it comes down to really just vendors and also agency partners understanding our complex business model. We work through a 3-tier system, meaning that we don't sell direct to the consumer. So that for us from the brand side has been a bit challenging, but I think it's just all about clarity going into these agreements that this is how our business model works, here are all of our second-party data partners, and how can we actually make the systems talk to each other, and how can we ingest that data in an effective way. I would say another thing that's really, really important and honestly crucial to bringing on a DMP or any sort of digital transformation like we're all sort of going through is company-wide buy-in and overall education. I think that you need to assume a lot less than you think people know, because you end up with sort of a chaotic environment of confusion and people wanting to understand, and it becomes frustrating on both sides. So I'm sort of a one-man show at Pabst for all things marketing technology. So having R&R on board to continually help to educate our brand managers, and also me being able to drive the message with our executive team, our sales team, and just cross-functionally in general is super, super important and crucial to the success of any transformation if you actually want to have people in your organization backing it, and most importantly, understanding it and understanding the value that it brings, because it's a heavy investment and it's also a big chunk of time. So I think that piece for me is the most important piece, is the education and understanding.
Before we go to Q&A, my final question has to do with one of the important parts of this is that Pabst was moving in the opposite direction of many other brands who, like Paul and Bear, were bringing more in-house. This part of this actually was that you guys had been doing everything in-house before. So part of this decision was now to start working with an agency and to move at least some of the media buying. I think you're still doing TV in-house?
No, we actually don't do
out.
TV.
Everything is out.
Yeah.
So you made a radical change from, again, decades of process here. Let's wrap by talking about that part. Why you made that decision.
Like I've said, the problem with the beer business is the beer business. If we have people that are buying media for us in-house and they're thinking so much in the beer industry and thinking along those lines, it's not an effective way to actually grow. When we bring in experts like R&R and the team of specialists that come into our meetings, it's very important for me to look at that and think, these people are coming in from an outsider perspective, and they're also seeing what's happening in the overall landscape with other clients, and they're applying that just naturally to our business as well. So for me, it's about bringing in the experts, bringing in the right people, and also not having to manage people. Day-to-day people management is, as we can all kind of agree on, is a lot of a time suck in a way. So having R&R come in, they know what they're doing. We don't have to onboard them. If someone changes in the company, they bring someone else in who's as equally as qualified for our business. And I think just moving forward and knowing that we're continuing to try to drive this business to a place of extraordinary behavior, it's important to have the experts at the table with us. And the same thing we did with creative. We work with agencies on that aspect too. So just a new perspective, experts at the table sitting with us, thinking outside of the beer category, knowing that the beer business is in a state of heavy decline right now.
And Trisha, you're in a little bit of a different situation too, because you're dealing with a client who's never had an agency before.
She's aged me. I kid. No, I mean, my job is to know the ins and outs of digital and channel. Her job is to know the ins and outs of beer. So it's really great for us to be able to come to the table and enlighten them of everything that's going on. And my job is to also know if Facebook changes their specs overnight or comes out with a new ad unit, I'm supposed to know the best practices for that ad and test it out. And test it out on another client, and that way we bring the learnings to you. And
I appreciate that.
we won't mention those other clients. But we also, I mean, we do 353 million in media buying in a year. That's not your budget. So we get to get the alphas and betas, and we have a ton of close relationships with the large players in the space, such as Facebook and Google. So we get to capture all that learning and bring it on a daily basis. So
Let's open up to questions. Do you have questions of Trisha and Jillian? They're actually Trisha's going to be running a roundtable on agency-client relationships at the end of the morning, so you might want to join that. So let me. Oh, we got one over here.
Hi, Mark Addison at Block Plus. So first, kudos for being controversial, and we're no stranger to controversy. In about 3 years, the world will come around to your way of thinking.
Hopefully
But,
so.
Yeah, but sort of a little bit off question, but of all those brands, why'd you choose Pabst?
So, I mean, the main reason is Pabst just being our biggest selling brand and most widely available. It made most sense to kind of make this huge shift with that. Also kind of going against the traditional branding of Pabst was important to us. We're doing a lot of stuff with Rainier right now too, where we're tapping into that, local PNW lifestyle and really supporting. We have a program called Taps for Trees, so it's really tapping in again to that kind of cultural context of that specific area. So if you look into even old style, we're doing a complete repositioning there. We're bringing on new brands every single day. So it's a constant growth. This is just the main, we only had 30 minutes today. Otherwise, we'd share some more information with you guys, but you'll see a lot coming from a lot of these brands too. And just one note, some of these are unsupported brands, meaning that we have no brand teams actually driving the message. They're just strictly based on sales. So
My wrap question let's bring us back to Grandpa Smith. He was your ideal customer 50 years ago. Do you have an ideal customer now for Pabst? Do you have a profile of who you're aiming at?
So, I mean, we're building out all of our traits and all of our segmentation with our DMP right now, but the ideal customer for us is really honing in on that multicultural consumer and the females, just knowing that they take up more than half of the US population. So that's important to us. But also, when you think about it from the loyalist standpoint and the advocate standpoint, the advocate is our ideal consumer. They're the ones who are going to really drive our brand message forward in a way that's meaningful and also influential to other potential consumers out there. So it's definitely a huge change that we're making, but we really are focused on that advocate consumer and continuing to drive our message outside of the Pabst mouth, if you will.